This is the Paranormal Podcast with Jim Harold.
Welcome to another edition of the Paranormal Podcast. I'm Jim Harold. Thanks so much for listening. You know, in 3 years of doing the show, one thing that we've never touched on, and it seems like it's long overdue, is the topic of astrology. And tonight we're very fortunate to have with us probably one of the preeminent astrologers on the internet. It's Maria DeSimone. She has her site, insightfulastrology.com, and you've been, Maria, into astrology for several years now, and by looking at your website, it's been an interesting journey, hasn't it?
Yes, Jim, thank you so much for having me on the show. I'm so excited to be the first astrologer to share this amazing world and language with your listeners. Astrology is actually the oldest science known to man. And a lot of people don't realize that astrology is both art and science. It's a beautiful blend, and it is the only metaphysical science that truly draws from it math, science, and the planetary activity from above. And in a nutshell, what astrology is for all of us is the study of how planetary patterns influence human behavior.
And, you know, that was actually going to be my question, because even though I've taken a great interest in the paranormal overall, I've never really gotten into astrology. Sure, you know, I will look at the paper and see what my day has in store occasionally, or I've gone as far, and I actually happen to be a Cancer, and you know, I'd read those books that say you're a Cancer and this is what you're like, and so forth and so on, but never really took it much further than that. And I guess my question always was, how can the heavenly bodies, the stars and the planets, how can they affect our daily lives on Earth? It just doesn't necessarily seem to connect. So how would you explain that?
Okay, well, first of all, I just want to point out to you and all your listeners that there's so much more than the sun sign to astrology.
Okay.
So even though the sun sign is the most obvious and easy to figure out factor in your birth chart, it's not your whole horoscope. Many people have never seen what their horoscope looks like. And all you need to know to cast a proper horoscope is your date, time, and exact location of birth. And when you see that map, what that map is a snapshot of what the universe looked like at the exact moment you were born. And the universe is always moving, the planets are always rotating, and obviously the Earth is a part of that. And that imprint is actually so unique that it cannot be replicated for 25,000 years. So you are that unique, your energy, your life lessons. And if you think about everything is energy, I'm sure you agree with me when I say that. The planets are energy just as we are. What happens when you are born is that when you take your first live breath in a human body, as a soul in a human body, the planets and how they are aligned at that moment will imprint whatever energy, whatever characteristics that they are having in their dance in the sky at that moment. That snapshot gets imprinted onto you in this physical world when you take your first breath. And that's the premise of how astrology works. And I know it sounds very far-fetched to people who don't understand astrology, who've never heard of it before, but if you read some books, if you just do some browsing on the internet and approach it with an open mind, you will realize that it is, like I said, a lot more scientific than it first appears. When we make predictions and when we talk about your characteristics, we're really not pulling something out of a hat. What we're doing is we're basing that on the specific alignment of the planets and how they influence you. So you said you're a Cancer. That Cancer sun is a part of you. It is what you're learning to become. But if you don't resonate with all of the qualities of Cancer, there's a reason for that. You don't know what your moon sign is in, and that's your emotions. You don't know what motivates you. That's your Mars sign. You don't know how you come across to others, and that's something called your rising sign. And I'm excited that later on we'll get to talk about this with some callers, and I'll be able to illustrate how I can bring the astrology to life for a person. So for you and for everyone else, I really encourage you to go and visit a website where you can see what your birth chart looks like. And I do have that. There's a free chart maker on my website that you can go to see what your birth chart looks like. It's a fascinating, fascinating map to look at. And if you've never seen one before, you will be absolutely amazed at how that piece of paper that you're staring at is really the blueprint of your soul and its journey here on Earth.
Oh, that's absolutely fascinating. You're so knowledgeable about this subject. How did you get into astrology?
That's a very good question. When I was about 28 years old, I had two little babies. I had a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old, and I was in that mommy stage of pretty much going out of my mind at home with the kids. And I had always wanted to be a psychologist and a writer. I have a degree in psychology, and I was always writing. So when I was 28 years old, in between the two babies, I decided to write my first novel. And my determination was to have it become a New York Times bestseller, of course. And so I was at a bookstore looking for books on how to query agents and all of that. And I see this poster, and it said that there would be an astrologer lecturing at the bookstore in a few nights, and he would be doing some spot readings for people who were having a birthday that month. And I was having a birthday that month. So I came back a couple nights later and attended the lecture. And that man, when he did the spot reading for me, he punched away my birth information on his laptop, and he invited me up to the podium to look at the birth chart. And literally, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up when I saw that birth chart for the first time. I was so blown away by how accurate this man was and what he was telling me about my life. He knew I was a writer before I said a word. He knew what was going on in my life, and I didn't tell him anything. And so it does come across as very psychic, and certainly there is an intuitive aspect to this work. But when I later started to study astrology more and find out how he knew the information, it just made me want to learn more. So to become an astrologer, you actually have to go to either a correspondence course or to an actual school, because you are required to learn the mechanics of astrology before you can practice it. So I hope that all of your listeners, if they're looking for an astrologer, do your research first. There are many well-respected organizations that can recommend an astrologer to you. You can do a search online and look up the credentials of an astrologer before you invest in a consultation with them. And that's the rest is history. I became an astrologer from there.
Well, actually, we should mention that you're I believe, the vice president for the Long Island, New York chapter of the National Council for Geocosmic Research. So you're involved in one such organization, I guess. Correct?
Yes, that is actually the most widely respected astrological organization in the world, and I'm very honored to be an active part of the New York chapter. You can go on their website, and I can't recall it offhand, but I know it's in the bio section of my website, or you could just go and Google the National Council for Geocosmic Research, and they have tons of astrologers that they recommend that are absolutely top-notch. There are, I would say, a few thousand astrologers in the world who are really, really good at what they do. So you want to get someone with the credentials.
And actually, I just looked it up while we were talking here. That's geocosmic.org, and we'll put that in the show notes along with, of course, Maria's website address. Maria, so to some extent, I guess, well, I don't know if this is right or not, our lives are shaped from the outset. Is that correct?
Well, here's the thing with astrology. I believe, and most astrologers agree, we choose our birth time and our birth circumstances because the soul incarnates here on Earth to learn specific lessons. And that map sets up the initial circumstances to help us, to put us in a situation so that we can learn those lessons. Now, there is an element of free will. The energy of your Cancer sun, for example, can be manifested in the most positive way or in a very negative way. You can be extremely nurturing and extremely ambitious in terms of your career, or you can be very smothering to the people